Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and happy holidays, I guess. For those of you listening to this in April, it's December.
But they may be near a different holiday,
You're a different holiday. That's right. Every season is a holiday season, right? That's right. Well, this is Trish Lambert, the co-host of Silmarillion Film Project, and I'm here with our primary co-host, Corey Olson, and a cast of threes. To have our this is our last session of the whole season and the final script review of season 4.
That's right. We are getting towards the end of season 4. We'll have a couple miscellaneous, and it's going to be the last episode of 2019. Because after this, of course, we're straight into the holidays there at the end of 2019. But we'll be back in January for just a couple sessions, tying up some post-production stuff, and then we will be on to Season 5. Season 4 has been such a long and interesting trip. Really fascinating stuff as we've been breaking new ground in so many different ways, like in our methods, but because we're breaking so much new narrative ground, and I was kind of reflecting on this again. I know I've been reflecting on this off and on, and I've often talked about this, but it's something I just kind of keep mulling over, how to explain to someone what I mean when I talk about like how the Silmarillion is not a novel, right? Like, what is the difference between the Silmarillion and a novel? How does it differ in narrative form? Why does the particular narrative form of the Silmarillion really mandate some of the, a lot of this work that we're doing, and which therefore opens the door to so many of the changes and developments that we have? And one example that I was just reminded of when I couldn't help but think of it when I was listening to the scripts today from because we're doing 12 and 13 today, and I was thinking about the choice of Turgon to go to Gondolin, right? And I couldn't help but reflect back over not only the Silmarillion but the history of the Silmarillion, and you sort of realize that choice, right? Turgon's choice to build Gondolin and to move there, right? And move all of his people there and kind of leave the Leaguer and leave the war and go into his little hidden valley there and set up his little elvish utopia. Tolkien never answered the question. Like the question, what was going through Turgon's mind? Like, what were the factors he had to weigh in order to decide whether or not that was a good idea? That's literally a question that never is put forward in the entire history of the writing of the Silmarillion, because the existence of Gondolin is one of the initial factors. Like the fall of Gondolin, one of the first stories that Tolkien ever wrote, and it's premised upon the fact that there were dark days when Morgoth's power was like spread over almost all of Beleriand, but there was one hope remaining. There was the hidden kingdom of Gondolin, where Turgon was king, and it was the last refuge of the elves. Like, that story, that premise of the story was one of the earliest premises of one of the earliest stories that he wrote. So the idea of this moment emerging like it is in the course of the narrative that we have, where we've introduced these characters, we've set the stage, and now we have to decide, okay, why does Turgon do it? And how are other people going to respond to it? And why does Aredhel go? And what is Idril thinking? What's in Idril's mind when she decides to go? Again, just those are things that are never, ever talked about. Any gestures towards that, towards the mechanism, how do they build it? How do they get there? Towards the thought process undergoing that decision. Any glimpses into that we're given in the Silmarillion as it stands is all like retcon stuff, and mostly partial retcon stuff that Tolkien has done way after the fact, right? When he's taken, because he took that original concept, that original fall of Gondolin framework, right? And like stitched it together with these other stories in order to make these other legends. But you see the lack of connective tissue there, right? Between the Gondolin concept, the Gondolin story, and what's going on in the rest of the flow of the history there. It's that lack of connective tissue is not obvious in the Silmarillion because it's fine. It doesn't, the kind of narrative it is, it doesn't need it, right? When you're just kind of telling a bunch of legendary stories, which are kind of put together in chronological order, but they're not really designed to be this kind. We're just told like, and in those days, Turgon went to Gondolin. Okay, there we are, right? That's really, for the sake of the kind of story that the Silmarillion is telling, all that we need to know. But that is very much not all that we need to know. And when we actually are kind of coming in on the ground level and thinking about these characters and their development in these stories and how they are all working together and one leading to another, it creates a whole world of questions, which Tolkien not only never answered, but never asked. And it seems to me inevitable, absolutely inescapable, that the answers to those questions are going to lead us to diverge in ways. In fact, I actually think, there are some people who whose response to some of our Silmarillion film project things, whose response has been like, why do you guys keep changing things? Like, why can't you just stick to the text? And honestly, under these circumstances that I'm describing, I kind of, thinking back, big picture, I'm kind of amazed we've stuck to it as well as we have, actually. It's because it's a pretty serious challenge at times to make this kind of thing work. And I definitely think that the move into Gondolin is one of those factors which, when we kind of come to it here, is pretty challenging. So anyway, it's just a little preamble on some of the creative work going on here, and one of the reasons why I think this is so much fun to do. So anyway, sorry, that was just my reflections from today on not only on the specifics of this, but again on this whole project that we have undertaken. So. I won't spend too long on this. Just a couple quick announcements before we go. These are pretty much the same as last time. We're in the middle of our moot season, so we don't have any immediate upcoming moots. The next one is Tex Moot down in Houston. The call for papers is up there in texmoot.org. So I encourage you to get in there. The registration isn't open yet, but there's still quite some time, still a little bit under 2 months before that moon happens. And of course, we're going to be opening registration for Mythmoot 7, Defying and Defining the Darkness soon, but save the date, June 27th through 30th, so that you can come and join us at Mythmoot and just find your tribe. Be surrounded, as Nick was describing, by people who, love all this stuff as much as you do. And that feeling, Nick, that you were describing, of feeling like you are like the most ignorant person in the room, is totally not true, by the way. But I understand what you mean by that. It certainly is a different experience, but it comes along with this really wonderful sense of community, right? Where like you don't have to explain yourself to people. I remember having a conversation about this just at Middlemoot a couple months ago, where there was a woman who came in a Feanorian t-shirt, and everyone was commenting on how much they loved her t-shirt all day long, and she's like, before I came here today, I've never met anybody who ever even got my shirt. like, do you know how many times I have worn this and no one has ever commented on it, and people just give me strange looks, and like, here everyone has said something. That's the kind of experience. So anyway, hope people will be able to join us for Mythmoot in June. And of course, our spring 2020 classes at Signum are coming up. So all of these things you can find at signumuniversity.org. One last thing I would mention, actually, also, through Christmas, we're having a gift certificate sale, like we always do. So if you would like to give the gift of an anytime audit of any of our Signum courses, you can buy at a reduced rate a gift certificate, and then you can give that to a friend or loved one who can then pick their own whatever course they want out of our entire catalog. So it's a really fun and unusual kind of gift idea. So I encourage everybody to think about that. That'll run through Christmas, essentially. So, all right, let us move on to our script reviews. And this, of course, this slide is just, as always, reminding folks where they can find these excellent scripts to read and enjoy in detail. on our discussion boards. But before we begin episode 12, I wanted to finish up this last detail that we had, that I was bringing up at the end of our discussion last week about episode 11. This question: why does Galadriel marry Celeborn? What does she see in the guy? I liked the reference. It was one of the, it was Celegorm, wasn't it, who actually used the word settle for Galadriel, that he was surprised that Galadriel would settle for somebody like that. Like, I've met Celeborn. He seems like a schmo. Who was it?
Corfin.
Okay, right. There you go. What's the answer? What's the response to that? Okay, so that was the question I asked, and there's some answers here, because they love each other. Okay, Hakan is saying that elves have a deep and strong soul connection with the love of their life, a bond that holds over ages and despite the death of one or both. Agreed. That elves generally, Finwë accepted, mate for life, right? So that's certainly a big deal. And it is true that Celeborn was there for her when she needed him. And she wants to continue that, even though now she is, stronger again and has moved past that with his, that moment, that crisis that she's been having in this season with his help. He's a great guy. This, by the way, is something that I think is going to be really fun for us to continue to do, right? I mean, as I have said before, right? Sauron and Galadriel are our two longest running characters in Silmfilm, right? Those are the two, more than any others, that we're going to keep coming back to again and again. And of course, Celeborn is going to be Galadriel's +1 all the way through that discussion. So, making sure that Celeborn, that we have this pretty interesting and long-term job, right? To try to show Celeborn's role, to work out in future seasons, to be working out more and more the dynamics of their marriage and of their leadership when the two of them are leading communities, as they will be on a couple of occasions. And by occasions, I mean for millennia at a time. But there will be several communities that they will be leading. And how do we show them as, relating to each other in the leadership of those communities and stuff. So I think that there's a lot that we can do without doing any, without going too far off the track, without making Celeborn into, a character who looks nothing like the Celeborn that we see in The Lord of the Rings, keeping him consistent with what we see there, but yet making sure he's not a non-entity. So certainly we can help our viewers not to be dissatisfied with Galadriel's choice of Celeborn. We can help that happen by making Celeborn a character who doesn't suck, basically, who's not boring and insipid all the way through. I have a question about this last one. Celeborn is the guy she wants to share her life with. She hasn't given up her ambitions for a realm of her own, but she's okay with the idea of ruling it together. I want more information on that. What's her vision of that? And how has that changed? If we had to describe, she was focused on her own ambition, on her own desire to rule before. How has that been qualified by the love for Celeborn that she has found over the course of this season? What would we say her right now, from the, things will happen and her character will grow and continue to change over the next, several thousands of years. But what would we say right now as she's pulling the trigger on this, right? She's going to tie the knot with Celeborn. How is she imagining this is going to work?
I think the main thing that has changed since the kinslaying and everything is that she's gotten to know Melian a lot better,
yes. And
she's seen how Doriath functions.
Yes.
So she doesn't necessarily want to be Melian 2.0, but she kind of does.
Right.
There's a glimmer of that. She doesn't want exactly what Melian has, but she wants some of that. And Melian doesn't rule Doriath. Melian is the queen of Doriath, as Thingol's partner. So she's changed her solo ambition to being an ambition that has a partner included, kind of based on Melian.
Right.
While not looking for her own version of Thingol, because I don't think we've shown Galadriel to have any particular interest in who Thingol is.
Yeah, no. And that's, I mean, that is a parallel which clearly does suggest itself, right? And the Galadriel Melian parallel seems fairly close, right? But the Thingol Celeborn parallel, as you're suggesting, seems much less close, right?
Right, so that she's not looking for a parallel. She's recognizing that there's a value to having a partner in anything you do in life,
right,
including rule a realm, or get married, or these sorts of things.
It's kind of hard to get married without one.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the other thing also is that this guy kept her secret from his liege, right? I mean. Right. There's a level of loyalty there. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, I'd certainly fall in love with the guy that did that for me. If I'd been involved in like genocide and the guy didn't tell anybody about it, that's awesome.
That's right.
Right?
True love is covering for your partner's genocide.
Genocide, yeah. And I think along with what Marie said, it's kind of like the Melian thing, and then it's like, geez, this guy is like uber loyal. I mean, he's like, this is a guy I could see standing by my side for millennia.
Yes.
I think that's part of it.
And the way that he has done it too, right? The way that he has handled himself. Right. He is clearly not going to be ever a rival to her.
No.
Right?
Right. That's another good point.
There's a kind of humility that he has shown which doesn't make him a pushover, because he has been, in a lot of ways, he has been the one guiding this, right? He has been a mentor figure to her. Right. As they've been working through this. So it's not that, she likes him because he's a pushover. But he does, he has been showing a kind of humility, her temptation is to focus on herself, right? Is to aggrandize herself. He doesn't have that at all. And I think that it's easy to understand, especially in the context of how he is treated, that she would appreciate that. She would value that, right? That she would see him as a good counterbalancing of her. And therefore, Maria, as you were saying, a really natural partner for ruling a realm.
There's actually a few interesting things about this. One being that I find it really interesting when the same people who really want to appreciate strong female characters in Tolkien's works just mock Celeborn for letting his wife take the lead, which I find rather hilarious. It's like, what? Like, I'm sorry, what is it that you want from this guy?
Yes, exactly.
I know.
What would please you? Yes.
Yeah. The second thing that I've been thinking about recently is that Celeborn is not really an analog of Thingol. Celeborn is actually more of an analog of Melian in this situation. So where Thingol and Melian kind of have this rather unbalanced situation, right? Mm-hmm. Where while Thingol is wielding all the political power, everybody really knows that Melian is significantly more powerful than he is.
Yes.
Celeborn and Galadriel kind of get it right in a way that Thingol and Melian really don't ultimately.
Yes. I agree. There is, it's not, you don't have to look very hard to see that there is kind of a core dysfunction in Thingol and Melian's marriage, right? On the one hand, they rub along as best you can when when you have that kind of an imbalance, right? When you marry a goddess, there are issues. It's kind of hard to have a balanced relationship when you marry a goddess, but still, but yeah, so Nick, I agree. And I had just been kind of working myself around to thinking in that similar direction. There will be a lot of ways. Not exactly. It's not just flipped, right? But in which Celeborn does have a lot of the traits that we see in Melian, right?
Right.
Just as she is the one who is wise, right? But who is going to take the role of wisely advising the person who is taking the lead.
Yeah. Whereas the imbalance is primarily one of the things that causes problems for Thingol and Melian.
Yes.
Celeborn and Galadriel are a lot more co-equal.
Yes.
Yes, she's a Calaquendi, and in raw power, she probably has a significant edge over him. But he's also a lot older than she is, even in Elvish terms.
Yes.
So there's that. One thing that I wanted to be very careful of, and I'm not entirely certain that we've done this adequately, and Trish, what you were saying earlier kind of brought this to my mind, is not to make it just that, Galadriel likes him because he's a nice guy and she kind of owes him. Like, that's
right.
kind of the situation I really wanted to avoid, because that's not really how life works.
Right.
I'm here to tell you.
Right. Especially, I mean, like, let's face it, like, till death do we part means a heck of a lot more to elves than it does to humans, right? I mean, she's making a multi-millennia commitment here. And
even death doesn't get you out of an elvish marriage.
Exactly.
Nope.
Yeah, you're right. It's not till death.
Until the end of time.
Right.
Is what you're signing on for.
Yes.
And for some reason, elves still get married.
Right. Exactly. So yes. I mean, so Nick, I agree. It can't be like, these last few years, you've been great, right? And you really helped me through this rough patch. So I think I want to spend the next 100,000 years in partnership with you. Like, yeah, that's not going to work as a rationale by itself, in any case. Yeah, agreed. One of the things that just kind of, thinking about the Thingol and Melian parallel and everything, and Nick, as you said, it's not exactly the same. One way to interpret some of Galadriel's comments, one of the things which, when people find Galadriel's comments about Celeborn comical, the ones that they're talking about, right, or when she's complimenting him, when she talks about how Celeborn is a mighty king and all that kind of thing, and we're all like it, she's saying that to stroke his ego and make him feel better. But I think there's a fairly simple way to understand this. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if Celeborn were in fact the Lord of the Galathrim. Like, if you were one of the Galathrim living on a daily basis there in Lorien, Celeborn has the political power primarily. Like, he's and Galadriel, she does other things, right? She has the Ring of Power. She is the one who is focused on, like, opposing Sauron and these other big kind of metaphysical things, right?
She's sort of the Secretary of State, right?
in a sense, right?
Foreign Secretary.
Foreign Secretary, yeah. I mean, she's involved in this, wholly other conflict, whereas he really is, or again, I could imagine her words suggesting that he really is the day-to-day ruler of the Galathrim. I don't think, does Galadriel decide, judicial disputes among the Galathrim when that happens? I doubt it. I would think Celeborn would do that, right?
Yeah, I agree.
But, of course, in the narrative of The Lord of the Rings, Galadriel, stands 50 times taller than Celeborn because her, the narrative, right, the quest of the ring is, that falls straight in her bailiwick.
It's in her wheelhouse. Yeah,
absolutely. That's what she does. And so, of course, that's what we hear about. And that's what, the internal politics of the Galathrim is almost utterly irrelevant, right, to the story of The Lord of the Rings.
Right. And
the one time in which it connects, that is, namely, when they're brought before them. Remember, Celeborn responds when the strangers are brought before them, and also in the appendix, we're told that it's Celeborn who leads the army into Mirkwood and fights the Battle of Southern Mirkwood there, in that other theater of the War of the Ring. It's not Galadriel who leads the army. It's Celeborn acting as king of the Galathrim, as the Lord of the Galathrim, who does that. Anyway, so there are definitely ways. I could just see
the two of them standing up on their flat, right, watching the 8 people arrive, and him turning to her and saying, I think this is yours, dear.
Right, exactly. You know, but we should probably both attend to this one, right? Yeah, there's going to be some overlap of responsibilities, but you know what, honey, I'm going to let you take the lead because this is your.
This is really kind of in your
this is your area. Yeah. Exactly. So anyway, I'm not saying that that's necessarily how we need to think about it moving forward, but again, I think even the things that are actually said in the text of the Lord of the Rings could be understood in that way. That is a theory that would make sense of many of the things that Galadriel says, and would certainly make them seem not silly or not comical. Yeah. Okay. So I think this is finding in Celeborn somebody whom she respects, but also whom she recognizes a good partner because he is complementary to her in some important ways, I think is a really, really important thing for us to be thinking about and for us to be sure. I mean, this is, in some ways, of course, this issue is not, I mean, it is involved with episode 11, of course, like with the whole betrothal scene. We need to make sure that the viewers have a clear sense that she's not settling, that this is not, some kind of post-trauma rebound relationship that she's going to end up regretting for the next 150,000 years. But also, as we move forward and we show the two of them henceforth as a team operating in every single season that we have for the rest of Silm, we need to start thinking about those complementary ways in which they work together. I think it would be pretty cool. I mean, if we think about it, really, there aren't so many really good long-term husband-wife teams that we get in the Elvish world, right? I mean, we lose a lot of the wives. We lose a lot of the wives. Exactly. I mean, I'm sure Elrond and Celebrian might have been great, but she's gone. It's we have here an opportunity to show a real husband and wife team operating as a team together for ever, essentially. And again, thinking about that long-term payoff, right? Imagine Tolkien goes out of his way a little bit to give us a glimpse into the significance of Elrond's departure, right? Of Arwen's choice and Elrond's departure and their separation, right? He makes a little bit less of an effort, not no effort. Celeborn gets one speech, right? But there's only a tiny bit of a hint at what that separation between Galadriel and Celeborn means for them, right? When she goes away to Valinor and he decides to stay. Think about the payoff, right? Think about how that's going to feel. What a big deal that's going to feel like. Think about the freight, the emotional and freight of that departure, right? How they're going to feel the significance of Elrond's departure, of Arwen's choice, of Galadriel's choice, and Galadriel and Celeborn's separation there, right? Oh, my goodness, what a big deal that's going to be, right? That's awesome. Okay, any other thoughts on Galadriel and Celeborn?
No, I think that about covers it.
Okay. Maybe something, thinking script-wise, maybe something could be worked into that conversation. Because as I recall, last time I was talking about wanting a bit more of conversation between Galadriel and Finrod, right? Him being the logical person to ask the question, could you explain to me why you want to marry this guy? I want to make sure you're going to be happy and everything. And you've been kind of, off for the last,
100 years decades. Or so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just want to make sure things are okay. Something in that conversation about, what, the partnership that she foresees, the respect she has for him and, the complementary nature of their characters. I can imagine that being worked in Because that's the thing, right? You imagine the engagement scenes that we get, like at the end of Jane Austen novels and stuff like that, right? And it's not elvish betrothals for the reasons that we were just describing. These are not going to be like decisions made in a gush of emotion, right? I mean, that is just not how elves are going to be operating when they're choosing their spouse. So that kind of discussion, I think, would be good for that reason as well. Like it's not just that she's emotionally invested, right? It's all of the reasons she has to believe that this partnership is going to be really good and really fruitful moving forward. So I think but again, I know it's going to be challenging in some ways because it's one thing for us to show the elves thinking and feeling in ways that are kind of different from the way humans think and feel, right? But in doing that, like in having an engagement scene with them thinking and feeling in different ways, like here we're like stepping on the toes of we're transgressing against like all of the these robust traditions of modern film and everything else. Like we know how betrothal scenes are used to go, right? And for us to do a betrothal scene that doesn't inspire a gush of emotion in the same way, right? That isn't just somebody flinging herself into somebody else's arms, right? If that's not the way it goes down, we run the risk of it feeling strange, but it kind of should feel strange, right? As we've said so often about so many elvish things. We don't want it to be totally incomprehensible and off-putting, but...
One thing that Hakan had pointed out was that Finrod should see Galadriel and Celeborn together and recognize what their relationship is.
Yes.
And therefore, while he can still question her about, so what's up with you, it shouldn't necessarily be in a way of, and you're still in that same bad place you were in the last time I saw you. It's more of the, well, whatever you're doing is working, and right. He's obviously good for you, and I wish you both the best. Like there has to be a recognition there that he sees that in her. So it's not necessarily a sudden realization that we're going for, as you point out, but we can probably still get some of the reactions just in a different format, maybe a little more muted.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And as we've said before, Finrod is one of the most, empathic of all of the Noldor that we've shown. So yes, he should not be oblivious. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Plus, Finrod and Celeborn know each other really well.
Yes.
They've been living several years together in the camp of the Noldor, but when, in episode 1, when they first show up and Círdan and Celeborn come down and live with them until Maedhros gets rescued.
Yes, exactly. Finrod was from even before Finrod came to Doriath, Finrod and Celeborn were allies long since. Yeah, no, agreed. He will know him very well as well. So presumably he has a higher opinion of Celeborn than Curufin does, right? Which would be no surprise. So I agree. It isn't that we want to show her having to talk around an older brother who is reluctant to give his approval or something like that. That's not the scene that we would have. He would get it. But he would also want to understand. He would be interested in hearing her about, again, her vision for this, right? And part of that, I think, is also just a matter of him. I think about that conversation from episode 12 about how Galadriel's changed, right? Even when Curufin is talking about it rudely, it's true. She has changed, right? And so even though Finrod, he is very perceptive, he's still going to be trying to understand exactly where is Galadriel right now? What are her plans? What are her goals? What are her desires? And how has she changed? He's definitely going to still be kind of needing her help in really understanding that. And this is definitely a big part of that. Okay, cool. Let us move on then to episode 12, which I've already been giving glimpses to. So the primary business of episode 12 is the beginning of the, well, really the beginning and the middle, right, of the building of both Gondolin and of Nargothrond. And we've got Arathel's farewell tour going on here in episode 12 as well. And the other, so the two, probably the two biggest subplots, other than the construction of the secret cities, is Arathel and her farewell tour and her choice that lies before her, and the exiled dwarves, the petty dwarves.
Yeah, because apparently just building cities isn't super good TV.
Yeah.
I have it on pretty good authority that that's
Civic
the case.
Planning. Ooh, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean...
I don't know. My little brother loves to watch other people play Minecraft.
It's not the same thing.
It's definitely not.
It's not the same thing. My kids watch some of the same videos, I bet, and it's not the same thing.
I mean, like it basically would be about an hour of C-SPAN, essentially, is what you'd point out.
Right.
Again, not great TV. So in order to kind of get into the Gondolin plot, we spent a lot of time with Arathel, and to get into the building of Nargothrond, we used the petty dwarves, which we had alluded to earlier in the season. So they don't come out of nowhere, which is good.
That was the first question that I wanted to ask, because as usual, I've forgotten everything that came before, or rather, I remember our discussions of the petty dwarves, but I don't remember earlier in the season. Like if we had made the decision to move them and their story entirely here. So what have we included already about that?
So the first time Galadriel goes to Doriath, Norn sees her and decides to spontaneously tell Mablung the story of the petty dwarves.
Right. When they're talking about like, hey, what's wrong with her? Right.
Right. So it's Norn's comment of, this person looks really ambitious and therefore dangerous, and you should probably get rid of her, and all the Noldor with her. Like Norn's commentary there is very pointed, but because he's telling a story about someone else, it doesn't come across as impolite.
Right.
Right.
Maybe.
And it also kind of toys with the whole, because there's another dwarf who's going to be staring at Galadriel in a completely different way.
Yes.
And Mablung in that scene actually accuses Norn of being smitten by her,
right.
Which of course is not the case, but it was just kind of fun to kind of play around with that a little bit.
A fun little inside foreshadowing joke. Yes.
So when we were talking about the petty dwarves, moving them to the back end of the season like this is, I would consider kind of a risky move to make. It might have been a little bit less, like they would seem a little bit less like the monster of the week, I think, if their plot had a little bit more room to breathe. But this is where we're at, where, as soon as we put the Dagger Aglareb in like the last third of the season, this was what was going to happen. So
yeah. Well, and it's hard because I totally hear what you mean. That if to give that room to breathe image seems a good one to me, but at the same time we don't have too much. Like we don't have much more story. I mean, we could make some more story, presumably, to give to them, but there's just not much plot that we have for them right now. And if we added more, they're gonna be. I mean, the whole point of the petty dwarves is that they're marginalized, right? So we're not gonna be coming back to them a lot. You know, they're gonna come
Right.
up in several times. But if we were to have worked, you know, a 3 or 4 episode arc into the story of Meme and the Petty Dwarves, I almost feel like that would have been false advertising. You know.
Well, we could definitely have gotten more of the dwarvish perspective here. Maybe had Norn come off as a little bit less of a, you know,
Norn is
sphincter.
Norn is a racist old man in this episode,
Right.
and there is no getting around that. He
Yeah,
Right.
is blatantly so. So we have made the choice to take a guy who started out his time on our show as someone bridging cultures and reaching out and being an ambassador, and this is how he ends.
Yeah.
And this is
Well,
the last we see of him.
And I think it's easy to kind of call this specifically racism. It's definitely bigotry. I would definitely.
Yeah.
But these are people from home, so it's not like, you know, these guys, like, you know, they all have red hair, so they're all evil, or something like that.
Right.
Although some of them probably do, because some of them were probably dwarves of Nogrod originally.
That's right.
Probably.
So just
But that's
just
not what
saying.
makes them bad. That's the thing.
right.
And
No,
they do physically become lesser than dwarves. Like, I'm pretty sure there's lines in the book about how they're less powerful than dwarves, they're smaller and weaker than dwarves. So there might be some physiological differences there, but that's not really what Norn is basing his assessment of the petty dwarves on. He's basing his assessment of the petty dwarves on their history and the fact that they were criminals.
Right.
he has reasons, but his rhetoric is pretty
Oh yeah.
all inclusive of the entire group, children, relatives of the guilty party, everybody should just die. I mean, he's pretty hardcore.
Yes.
Of course, the alternative to this would be to put any of these thoughts in Finrod's mouth, so it had to be Norn.
Exactly. and the thing is, so I really, I don't like so when a TV show is working with something like racism or slavery or something like that, I really dislike it when, in order to, like, you know, reach modern audiences, you know, a show is just basically kind of soft pedaling the whole thing, right? Like, I think it's, I mean, there are, like, bigots are a thing, like, that happens.
Yeah.
You know, bigotry is often a cultural norm, like, that's normal.
Yeah. And sometimes it comes from people you don't expect it from also.
Exactly. And it's totally, so yeah, the idea that, like, every, you know, like, if you're telling a story or showing a, you know, doing a film from, you know, from, like, the antebellum South, that, like, every white slaveholder has to also be a horrible person, you know, because they're slave owners, and so therefore horrible, right? Because that's horrible, so they have to be horrible. So, but, like, yeah, to show people who are, like, good people and, like, characters that you like, but they're also bigots, like, they have this, you know, like, it's part of who they are, and you don't like
John
that.
Wayne in The Searchers.
Yeah. Wait, who?
Like, I've seen John Wayne in The Searchers.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know, like, I've seen a lot of criticism leveled on this character who's clearly racist. Like, it's obvious that he's racist. And the film, I feel, goes out of its way to point out that that's bad.
Yeah.
But they don't like the fact that he's portrayed sympathetically at all.
Exactly.
And, like, he could still do good and heroic things, even if he has this kind of evil mindset in this area.
Exactly. I mean, the world's history is full of lots of people who have been good and admirable in many ways, except for the fact that they're also bigots in other ways. You know, it's like that's in fact the way the world is. And one of the artistic challenges, I think, is exactly, Nick, as you were describing. You don't have to make every character who is the voice of the bigotry, right, that you are depicting. It's okay for them to be you can make them sympathetic without being an apologist for the bigotry.
Right.
So yeah,
which is an important distinction. We do not think that, bigotry against the petty dwarves is totally cool.
No,
just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, I think my feeling about the script was that I thought it walked that line really, really well. I mean, as Maria, as you were saying, Norn's bigotry is absolutely unapologetic. I mean, that line, Rhiannon, that line about how much time it takes to scrub mold from stone, I was like, oh man, that was intense.
Yeah, you get the feeling that Mablung needed to go like soak in a hot tub for a little
right,
while.
exactly. Yeah.
Good thing they have a hot tub in Doriath.
Yes, yeah, it's a good thing that Thingol's got his hot tub, which the sons of Finarfin are no longer allowed to enjoy.
That's right. Yeah.
There's a little sign there that says "No Angron."
That's right. Yeah, he's revoking his membership to the spa.
We reserve the right to refuse admittance to anyone, especially Noldor.
Yes. Yeah, but oh man, so I mean, like I said,
the second kinslaying, we'll have to show the Feanorians like jumping in the hot tub.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, like I said, I loved the unapologetic bigotry of Norn. I thought that was very, but yet again, there's no question that that the narrative on the whole, the narrative of the episode on the whole is showing that this is not okay. Like that. I did not think this was like a pro bigotry episode at all, despite the fact that Norn, who has been, as you say, has been a sympathetic character from the beginning, even really like one of the shining exemplars among the dwarves, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, essentially, I would have liked to have had a little bit more time to show just how ingrained in the dwarvish culture this was. Like, we basically had to put all of that on Norn.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have spread it out a little bit, maybe get Azaghal involved. But, I think that what we have works. And like you said, it's not a huge part of the season arc. I certainly wouldn't suggest it should be. Yeah. But I think that what we have works in the context of what we're trying to do here. Yeah,
and one of the things that I really like about this, and this to me is a really provocative element, right? Finrod's ignorance, I think, is really provocative. Provocative in the sense of, talk about applicability, right, to external conditions into the modern world. Finrod,
he's unaware of his privilege. Is that where you're
in a sense? Yeah, or rather, like, there are a lot of people, right, who have inherited. It's not just being unaware of your privilege. That's kind of what I'm talking about, but not 100%. It's more like people who, white Americans growing up would not even enjoying, thinking about defending our rights to our land, and growing up in ignorance of, the transactions with the Native Americans, right, which led to that state of affairs, right? There's a lot of, because his situation is a real thing. That's a real factor in the modern world. People who are beneficiaries of acts like the kicking out of the petty dwarves from Nargothrond, but he's not culpable. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. Maybe he would have chosen otherwise. Who knows what he would have done had he been there? Maybe he would have done the same thing. Maybe he wouldn't have done the same thing. But it kind of puts a little asterisk next to the glory of Nargothrond, right? Which is not enough to tear it down, which is not enough to undermine him or to undermine Nargothrond, but that's a really good thing. I think it's a really subtle, it's a really powerful kind of thing. Just as, America has done over the course of its history with Native Americans puts a little asterisk next to all the things that modern people want to say about this wonderful land of ours, right?
Right. Right.
Again, it doesn't change that, like, many of the things that America has done have been really cool. But like asterisk.
I mean, Man on the Moon, awesome.
Right. But there's always going to be this asterisk next to it. And again, so
there's allowed to be uncomfortable history.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I mean, you're going to run into it at various times. We're making Finrod not aware. Will he eventually learn what happened? Will he have any contact with the petty dwarves in the future? Like, we've definitely left this open that we could revisit this at a later time if we chose.
Yeah.
We also left petty dwarves buried in what becomes Nargothrond.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they had been living there for some time, and there was a burial ground in there. So the idea that the petty dwarves have still left their claim on that land, and they still have stakes there. We left that a little open ended.
Yeah, I noticed that, and that is really interesting. At risk of digressing too much in this direction, obviously, we need Mime and the petty dwarves when we get to Turin, right? And then ultimately when we, Turin and Hurin, and, Mime's ultimate death in Nargothrond, back in Nargothrond, claiming the Horde of Glaurung. That's the major moment. From, Turin and Amon-Ruth down to Hurin and Nargothrond. That's the major role, really the only role, of the petty dwarves in the narrative of the Silmarillion. That's still a ways away. We've got several seasons between now and then. Do you guys foresee any... I mean, as you were thinking this through, did you have thoughts about what kinds of stories we might want to give them, or ways, even if they're sort of smallish ways, in which we would have them and we could have them involved?
Well, I would kind of like to keep them uninvolved, because what the book says when the petty dwarves just show up randomly in the Turin story is that they had been almost completely forgotten even by the elves.
Yes.
So, one of the things I did on the message boards when I was preparing for this was I looked through the Children of Hurin, and I tried to find evidence that Beleg would know who the petty dwarves were, to see if he would recognize Mime or recognize him as a petty dwarf. And I couldn't find anything concrete that would say Beleg would definitely know who the petty dwarves were. It's not mentioned that all of the Sindar had contact with them. It's mentioned that they mistook them for beasts and hunted them at some point, and that stopped. But it doesn't say who specifically was involved in that.
Yes.
So I think if we just have the petty dwarves in this episode and then they sort of disappear, there might be little tiny hints of them in the background, not the main focus of an episode.
Right.
But I don't think they should come back for another storyline until they show up with Turin, and then we have to basically have them explaining who they are, because the characters in the show have either forgotten about them or don't know about them in the first place. And the viewers have likely forgotten about them as well, which sort of helps with the conveying that this has been a very long time and these people have been forgotten.
Yeah. And also, I imagine that this whole thing has made Mablung feel very uncomfortable, and I can't imagine that he spends a lot of time talking to a lot of people about this, because he's the only witness, really.
I was just thinking that
really knows.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure he told Thingol what happened, but the fact that he doesn't tell Finrod suggests that he's embarrassed by the situation.
Yes. And by the way, even just our depiction of Mablung, the really uncomfortable one in this situation, that too, I think, is a really interesting thing to do. I mean, it's the kind of thing that, I can imagine somebody, reading this or watching it and being like, oh, Mablung shouldn't just stand for that, right? Mablung should have done something. Mablung should have... But, life is harder than that,
Yeah.
It's awkward. First of all, he's in a really awkward position because Thingol promised this place to Finrod, right? So, he's So he's got a significant means and ends problem, and he's not the decision maker there either, right? So he's in a legitimately awkward position, just like politically speaking.
Right. He would have to go back to Thingol.
Yeah.
And by the time that happened, it's done.
It's done. Exactly. The dwarves are there with their axes. Yeah, absolutely. Right. But of course, the other thing is that, again, it's easy to say, but it's easy to say, like, well, you know, you must stand up to bigotry wherever you see it. But we've all had, I mean, many of us, I'm sure, have had friends who are bigots, and who are, like Norn, generally good people, except they're also bigots in this one other respect. And like, dealing with people like that, like standing up against people, is not as easy as people can kind of make that sound.
Especially since it often happens too quickly for you to really, like, by the time you even realize what somebody's saying.
Yes.
Like, you feel like a heel for kind of like hang on, let's go back a few minutes in this conversation.
Right.
Did you actually just say, you know?
Right. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult situation. And again, so Nick, again, thinking back to the reference you were making about people objecting to that one character being depicted sympathetically despite the fact of being a bigot and whatever. I often feel that reactions like this, to, you know, when bigotry or racism or something like that is depicted in a show, a lot of the outcry seems to be oriented towards an assumption of like a really black and white depiction, right? Like, this is just like, it should be like everything associated with bigotry and racism should be obviously wrong and should obviously, you know, be suppressed. And like, anyone who is good and sympathetic should be standing up against it, right? And it's like, dude, like, what world do you live in? Like, we don't live in that world, and it's not even. It's like, it's harder than that. Things are much more complicated.
That's the world of Harry Potter, because that is the one. No, I mean, in all seriousness, that is the one criteria for whether someone is on the good guys team or the bad guys team.
Right.
And that's how you can handle that. And we're not creating the world of Harry Potter.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that was a super awkward element of, to the point where her choice to embrace that made Voldemort's character intrinsically self-contradictory and perplexing. But anyway, well, let's not get into that too much. But I agree. It's that is a way to handle it, but it creates, I think, way more difficulties than much better. I think if we're going to deal with this, and we should, and why wouldn't we? Let's try to deal with this complex issue in a complex way. And Mablung just standing there being ultimately, Mablung is guilty of inaction, right?
Right.
But he's sitting there being like, oh, what? Oh gosh, I'm uncomfortable, but I shouldn't. And well. That happened.
Now that happened.
Yeah, exactly. And he's uncomfortable, and he's not like forswearing his friend. You know, he's not gonna. You know, what? It's tough. It's tricky. You know.
Yeah, and when I was looking over this, it occurred to me, like, this is actually one of the more Game of Thrones episodes that we've done, and then all of a sudden I realized, wait, no, this is the reverse of Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones is, most of the time, it's about bad people who occasionally do good things.
Yes.
Whereas this is a complete reverse. This is generally good people who still do bad things.
Right.
And that, I feel like, that's a lot closer to reality in my mind.
Yes.
Like, there's no mustache twirling going on here. I don't know why I can't say mustache anymore, but
yeah, no, you're right. There are no complete villains in this episode. Norn isn't. He's the worst. He comes off worst, certainly, but even he's not just horrible. And not only is he like generally okay, apart from being a bigot, but there's also, we can see he's got personal issues, right? The story of the murder of his brother helps us to understand how could somebody whose whole life, whose whole career has been, building, Nick, as you said, building bridges between cultures, right?
Yeah.
How can he be so totally blind about this? And
because he's not a mere xenophobe.
Right. Exactly. He's been the poster child for non xenophobia, you know?
Yeah.
Like that's been his role. And yet it fits. It works, right? Why would somebody who has been a professional anti-xenophobe his whole life be so bigoted, so unquestioningly, unwaveringly bigoted on this one point? Because he's got issues, which has created this blind spot for him. To him, this is not even the same kind of question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else about the Norn petty dwarves thing that we want to bring out here?
Okay, so the last...
because this was one of the most like kind of co-equal plots episodes that we've done, where the Nargothrond and the Gondolin sections were really kind of part of the same thing. Like, I mean, they were partners essentially as subplots in the episode.
Yeah, agreed. So okay. I guess I had a couple questions about the end of the meme. Okay, well, actually, two things. One small and one bigger. The smaller thing, we have to be careful not to make meme too old. Like, when he was, like, getting out the walker at the end, I was like, wait, it's still going to be a while, but he still needs to be alive, right?
This isn't the same meme that Turgon will encounter.
Okay, we decided that's going to be another meme.
Yeah. And they are passing the name meme along, like the name Durin is passed along, even though they aren't really reborn meme. They're sort of emulating that, trying to create their own clan, and that's something we'll probably bring out later on.
Okay, that's great. That's good. I just wanted to. I was getting a little nervous about that. I'm like, we're going to be running through memes at a shocking rate, but that's fine. That's excellent. So my second question is it wasn't obvious to. So we had that scene with Meme and the other petty dwarves about what to do, right? The little like crisis meeting that they had. When I read that and moved, I emerged from that sort of thinking that they were going to fight, or at least that it was likely that they were going to fight. So
that was kind of a goal of that episode of that scene.
But I guess it left me with the question: so what was their plan? Like when they didn't fight, so I was expecting a fight to break out, and a fight didn't break out, which is like so the raising and disappointment of that expectation was fine. That easily can be just part of the drama of the episode. I have no objection to that. But when we found them in the end, when they were discovered, like in the, the petty dwarf panic room there in the depths of Nargothrond, it wasn't clear to me like what their plan was, right? Like what's their game? Their plan was to be like, if we withdraw to these inner chambers, maybe they won't notice us and we'll continue living out the rest of our lives in here, and the people who are going to be taking up permanent residence here aren't going to notice that we're here.
So their goal is to hide and try to outlast whatever elves and dwarves are at their gate, because they don't necessarily know what Nornalang are up to. They don't know about Nargothrond.
Right.
So it's like, surely these guys aren't going to stick around too long. So they're making us clear out, but maybe if we just hide, we can come back and reclaim it when they're gone. Right. And then they just never leave, and now they're trapped back there, and
Okay.
It would be kind of like if, 10 years from now, someone was hiking in the woods of like upstate New York and found like a previously uncontacted enclave of like Mohicans,
right,
which I get, like, I understand where you're coming from, where could they really have legitimately expected that was going to work?
Yeah, but but Marie's right. They don't know about Nargothrond, right? They don't know that an immortal elf lord is coming to make this place his primary refuge, right? I mean, like that's,
They may not even know that the elves are immortal. They may not have had
Yeah.
contact with the elves enough to understand that about them.
Sure.
Also, they may know enough about these caves to know that there's nothing really worth mining there. So they
Right.
probably are just assuming that the dwarves are going to figure that out and move on.
Maybe some reference in the discussion that they have amongst themselves, maybe some reference to more of this kind of thing, like
what are they even doing here?
what are they even doing? Right, to show their ignorance of, because that would make more sense. The idea that like Nargothrond is going to happen, but like for some reason they're never going to notice us living down here. It was not clear to me what their end game was. So
I mean, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm didn't notice a Balrog living in their basement for a while, one presumed. So
well, that's different, though. That's different.
That Balrog was trying to do the exact same thing that the petty dwarves are trying to do.
Right? He's like, maybe these darn dwarves are gonna will leave eventually if I just stay quiet. Yeah.
Gee, what is this shiny metal all around me? I have no idea.
Right. But whatever it is, I'm sure they probably won't notice.
But I agree. If we give a little bit more setup to their plan, their actions will at least make sense to the viewer.
And that can be done without totally undermining the suspense of like.
Right. We don't have to give away the surprise, but
at
least give them a reason for what they think. Yeah.
Yeah. And it certainly, the thing that I really liked about the surprisingly non-violent plan of the petty dwarves was that it ended up, I mean, again, the way that it made the bigotry of Norn completely obviously not supported by the narrative, right? That was the clearest thing. Like, the petty dwarves not only had been minding their own business living here in the first place, but they responded like as positively as they could, like without just moving on, right? Wanting to keep their new homeland. They acted on that in the most, unobjectionable and nonviolent way they possibly could. And so when they're turfed out after that, they look even more like victims than they would have done before. So yeah.
Yeah, we wanted their victim status to be very, very clear, so that when Norn was saying that they weren't, it was obvious to the viewer that we're not supporting Norn's viewpoint.
Right, exactly. So that was great. Okay. Good. Let's see. So let's move on to the Gondolin storyline.
So there were a couple of points about this that I really struggled with as we were moving into our discussions about the episode. So I know back when you guys were talking about Turgon and his visions.
Yeah.
I know from listening to one of the sessions that I happened to not be present for that you talked about wanting him to know that Olmo was involved.
Right.
Now part of that is to kind of set up the fact that Olmo's involved, so it's not completely out of nowhere that that this one guy in particular hasn't abandoned the Noldor. The thing I would say that is we did have a conversation between Manwë and Olmo specifically to address that actual thing back back a couple of seasons ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm not entirely certain that, like, I feel like the audience, in seeing all the water motifs around those visions, is certainly going to pick up on that. What I'm less certain of is that the elves are immediately going to assume that it's Olmo. The Noldor didn't have a whole lot of contact with him prior to their exile. I just don't see I don't see that they really have any reason to assume that it's him. And B, I feel like it kind of pulls away some of Turgon's agency in a way. where he's just following almost instructions the whole way through. And even, like, obviously he's going to appear and, like, there's that.
Right.
And once that, like, but I feel like that kind of just confirms that
Yes.
that he's going in the right direction.
Yes. Yes.
And also, even if Turgon suspects that he's getting these visions from Olmo, having everybody else kind of talking about, oh, well, Olmo says to do this, and Olmo said through Turgon to do this. Again, it's making it about their trust in Olmo rather than their trust in Turgon.
Yes.
Which is the direction we could go in, but I feel like Turgon's a more interesting character if he's able to kind of drive that kind of devotion himself.
Agreed. This is what I really liked about, I believe it was the conversation between Arthel and Fingolfin and Fingen, when they were talking about Turgon's interpretation of dreams and stuff, right? First of all, I do agree that it is perfectly legitimate to have the Noldors. So, like, if you were to say to one of the Noldor at this point, Olmo sent me a vision of what we should do, for the Noldor to respond to that by saying, "What, really? Like, why would he do that? And why should we, like, okay." I mean, like, for them to feel like that's kind of out of left field, because, as you say, they did not have a great relationship with Olmo. He was never their guy. So it might seem a little random for them to be getting messages from Olmo. That's not gonna, it's not like the reaction is gonna be like, oh, a message from Olmo. Well, that obviously, like, we should trust that implicitly in all ways.
Yeah.
That's fine. I agree. Like, showing some resistance to that, to be like, who's Olmo to us, and why does he care? Like, what's his game in all of this? What on earth is going on? Is, I think, perfectly legitimate to have some of the Noldor making that response. But thinking about what you're saying about having this, to make sure that this is really Turgon's story and not just an Olmo story, I think that the note that was struck there in the discussion between Arthel and Fingolfin and Fingen is really good, because yes, Olmo initiates this. He grants the visions, right? And yes, it is true that Turgon is following the guidance of Olmo. But that's a Turgon story. Like, that, I mean, think about the things that have to happen in order for Turgon to be following Olmo's advice, right? First of all, he has to not, he has the vision, he has to not dismiss the vision. That could easily happen, right? He has to perceive that he is, in fact, that what he's receiving is, in fact, a message from the Valar. He has to furthermore perceive that this is a message from Olmo specifically. Finrod doesn't get that. Does Finrod get that? I don't think Finrod gets that.
Yes, I think he does.
Does he get it?
I think that the way that the dream comes from Olmo, I think that's something that they both understand, and they both trust him. How much they make of it to other people depends. I think personally they both know that Olmo is the one who's guiding them.
Right. Okay.
I don't think, like, it wouldn't make sense for Olmo to send them mysterious visions that they don't know the source of, because if his goal is to help the Noldor and to get them to establish these cities, he doesn't want to be too ambiguous about it. He doesn't
Not
want to
too
give
ambiguous
them
about the instructions.
Chance of dismissing.
Right, but the source of the instructions is less necessary than the explicitness thereof. That is to say, Olmo's not looking for props. He's not trying to raise his own profile necessarily by doing this. It's fine if Finrod understands that. That's fine. I think it might actually be cool if Finrod knows. Finrod could be saying something more vague, something like, I believe that the Valar have sent me a message. Like, he can tell that this comes from the Valar. He believes that this comes from the Valar, but he doesn't get that. Whereas it's Turgon who has the further insight to say, this is Olmo. This is Olmo at work here. I think that this is Olmo sending us a message, and I'm not sure why, but he also understands why, and is given the follow-up vision. One of Turgon's character elements from the beginning has been the more kind of priestly, prophetic, foresighted one, right? So the very fact that he is both sensitive to this guidance and responsive to this guidance and perceptive about not only where it just like the mere fact that it comes from Olmo, but he's going to understand in a clearer way. He's going to be more of a part of Olmo's plans moving forward, right? And part of that, I think, is going to be connected to the fact that he is he's more like he gets it better, right? He's a better receptacle for this plan. He receives it more clearly. He gets it better. It is a Turgon story, like how in Turgon, Olmo finds the one best suited among all of the Noldor to be Olmo's partner in the plans that Olmo is trying to bring forward to undermine Morgoth and to help and support the elves. Not everybody's going to be perceptive to it. Not everybody perceptive of it. Not everyone's going to be open to it in the same way, but Turgon is. And therefore, I do think we can introduce through that because Nargothrond and Gondolin do operate differently in these ways, right? Finrod succeeds in doing the basic thing that Olmo instructs in the vision, right? Like, hey, bad times are coming, make a strong and secret refuge for people to flee to. And he succeeds. He builds Nargothrond, and it does last longer than most of the rest of Beleriand. That's fine. That happens. But Turgon's relationship with Olmo and Olmo's plans is much closer, right? Gondolin is more than just another strong and secret refuge like Nargothrond, right? There's that additional element of prophecy and the one that is to come, and the armor for Tuor, and the one and the prophecy of Huor in the fens of Serech, right? And all of those things, and Earendil's, of course, in the original Fall of Gondolin, Earendil's explicitly sort of messianic birth. There's much more to the relationship between Turgon and the plans of Olmo. So showing that he gives it to the two of them, right? Olmo has chosen Turgon and Finrod as the two who are most likely who are best suited to be his agents, right? For the plans that he is trying to bring forward. But it's a Turgon story, and Turgon remains the hero of this story and not just a pawn of Olmo, because it's his response, it's his insight, discernment, and faithfulness, which enables him to be or to become the instrument, the primary instrument of Olmo's primary plan for undermining Morgoth. And we will see that relationship. We're already in these 2 episodes seeing the relationship between Turgon and Olmo grow, right? In ways that Finrod and Olmo's relationship isn't going to grow. We know that Olmo is going to reach out to Nargothrond again, but it's different, right? Finrod's already dead, for one thing. But again, Nargothrond is never going to have the same role. Olmo's not going to forget it. He's going to send messengers a second time to it. But it doesn't play the same role. And again, that in, I think, the way that we can direct the story could be down to Turgon. And that's what makes it his story. Do you see what I mean, Nick?
Yeah, no, I definitely see what you mean.
Well, another thing is that Olmo is in no way forcing Turgon to act on his dreams and visions and go build Gondolin. He shows him a warning, he gives him suggestions, he gives him guidance, he offers to help him, but Olmo never says, Turgon, you need to do this.
And even the guidance is in response to Turgon's actions, right? Turgon doesn't set out to find Gondolin because Olmo begins to guide him towards Gondolin. Olmo begins to guide Turgon towards Gondolin because Turgon has set out, right? And set out sort of in faith, right? To find it. And when he does that, Olmo responds by sending the birds and helping him, right? In ways that he does not help Finrod, right? Finrod gets 0 help from Olmo in identifying Nargothrond. Oh, and look how that worked out, right? Finrod ends up with the asterisk next to Nargothrond, right? And the Trail of Tears of the petty dwarves, right? Because he went through completely like mundane political channels in order to find his secret and safe refuge, which is still a fulfillment, like a heeding of Olmo's warning, but it's a totally different. The response, Finrod's response to the vision, is in that way a totally different flavor. When Turgon says, "Okay, one of the Valar, and I think it's Olmo, is trying to tell me something. I'm going to trust him that he has a plan and that I'm going to be a part of that plan, and I'm willing to be a part of that plan. So I'm going to wander off with my people, and I'm going to go, since I know it's Olmo, I'm going to go to the Wells of Sirion, right? I'm going to go to the, and I'm going to see guidance there." And he gets it. When he does that, right, in response to his initial insight and faithfulness. So again, it still is, even with Olmo not calling the shots, because I absolutely agree, Rhiannon, it's very important that Olmo is not, he's not like dictating, right? You know, it's not like, you know, Turgon has a comm feed, right, where Olmo is telling him what to do. Nor is he even giving him instructions until he instructs him to leave the armor, right? But it's not only not that not only is Olmo not giving instructions, which he is following, almost apart from that first vision, almost not initiating. It's Turgon who's initiating, and Olmo responding.
So obviously, there doesn't have to be any compulsion on Olmo's part for Turgon to be kind of removed from the driver's seat of the decision-making process in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. That isn't quite so much what bothers me so much as that he's certain enough that it's Olmo, that he goes around telling everybody that it's Olmo, and that's the thing that everybody around him is putting their trust in. You know, everybody is talking about Turgon's visions as if they are completely from Olmo, as if they know that they're from Olmo. When
do they think Turgon is lying to them?
I don't think he would tell them because he's certain enough to like. There's no way he could know that for certain until Olmo shows up personally.
Right,
so
but again, that's why I think
I'm getting visions from Olmo.
Yeah. Again, I think the dynamic there, and again, this is the thing that I was saying that I really like about the Fingolfin and Fingon discussion, is Turgon saying Olmo is sending me a vision, and this is what we should do in response to it. That involves two separate leaps of faith. If you hear Turgon saying that and you're like, okay, Turgon, that's totally the way to go then. If you say that, then you're making two leaps of faith, right? Leap of faith number one, Turgon knows what the heck he's talking about, right? Turgon's not deluded about the fact that this is coming from Olmo. And two, Turgon is correct to act on that message in these ways. Right, because as you said, Nick, I mean, who's Olmo, right? I mean, did they ever interact with Olmo? He almost never goes to Valinor, right? Did they ever even meet Olmo before? It's quite possible they haven't met Olmo before. I mean, even when they lived in Valinor, he's not one of the Valar that they hung out with, right? So he would be, so for Olmo, and therefore also Olmo's, not just his messages, but I mean his agenda, right? To be a mystery to them. And therefore, it would be totally plausible for somebody to say, okay, maybe Olmo is telling you stuff, but that doesn't mean you should follow that. I mean, Olmo's kind of he's weird. He hangs out by himself. That's strange. You know, is he on Team Manway exactly? I mean, like, do they know that for sure? Are they confident in that? Anyway, so, Turgon asserting that doesn't spoil the game, doesn't make it not about him. It's still, people have to have trust in Turgon's judgment, right? Both his insight and his judgment. Yes, this is Olmo, and yes, this is a good idea, so I'm doing it. They have to be on board with both of those things, which means they have to trust Turgon. It's still a big deal for Turgon to do that. If Thorondor had come to him and said, I've come straight from Manway and he has this message for you, you know, then Nick, that's when I see that kind of, then we have like a loss of agency, right? Because who's gonna gainsay that? But when you're getting dreams, which you believe to be messages from the Valar that you don't know who he is and what he's up to and why you should trust him, and you decide to A, believe that, and B, act on it, there's not a loss of agency in the same way.
I just feel like a level of certainty that everybody seems to have, it just like it doesn't pass the muster for me.
I agree that we could
it
have
raises
more
a lot of red flags in my mind.
Right.
Like everybody's like, oh yeah, sure, Homo, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, there I do think that we could introduce. In fact, I think it would be useful to have a couple different versions of some dissenting and uneasy voices, right? To have somebody say like, okay, what if it is from Olmo? Like, he's kind of sketchy, isn't he? What's up with that? Why should we obey? And two, to have some people openly questioning this. Like, sounds like, you know, Turgon has been, you know, is kind of going off the deep end, right?
Which would have to be, like, all of that would have to be set up also in additional scenes through episode 9. You know,
but
like,
we can go back and tweak some of the dialogue around some of the stuff to make sure it's not the same note getting hit 15 times and instead get different nuanced notes each time it comes up.
Mhm.
But I do think that the overall impression we want the viewer to have is that Turgon is a visionary.
Yes. Yes.
That he has this insight, he has a plan, he's working towards this plan, he's getting other people on board with the plan, they're all pretty excited about the plan. Like, Turgon makes this all happen.
Right.
But if we don't portray him as a visionary and we let other people be talking about it and doing things and just being like, oh yeah, dreams from Elmo, you can lose sight of that. So it is true that we do need to keep the focus there, but
well, and especially, I mean, the other thing to keep, and this did come out in the dialogue, but I think it's something that could even maybe be emphasized more. It's counterintuitive, right? I mean, he's being asked to do this frankly countercultural thing, right? While everybody else is hunkering down for the siege. And again, this did come up in the narrative several times. I thought this was you know, the objection that was done most justice in the course of the episode. People saying like, yeah, our leaguer would be working out a lot better if Turgon were helping instead of not helping and going away. It would be easy for people to misunderstand that, for him to look like a coward, you know, for him to look like he's just abdicating, or how defecting is a little too strong, but deserting. It could look like a desertion. It could feel like a desertion to many. And it's going to take trust in Turgon, which not everyone is going to have on the same level, right? To buy in, to accept, to not feel resentful for what he's done, for the void that he has left in the once very populous and now abandoned country that he leaves behind him. So yeah, I think... So 2 questions with this. We got some good general skepticism from the Feanorians, where we might expect it, where they are the ones who are, I think, most likely, I think they did in Act 3, they're most likely to express so Turgon is deserting? Cool, right? That's, here we thought you guys were on the useless side anyway, and now Turgon's going full useless and completely running away. Okay, right, well... So the Feanorians have to pick up the slack again. What else is new, right? You know, for the Feanorians to be talking like that makes perfect sense. Fingolfin and Fingen. I really liked, the thing that I liked about that conversation is that what was emphasized was their belief in Turgon. They're willing to accept what Arthel is telling them because they have faith in Turgon's insight and his foresight and kind of prophetic ability there. But one of them, perhaps, maybe Fingen, should voice some of these uncertainties. What if Fingon?
Well, see, the problem with Fingon, though, is that he prayed to Manwë and an eagle got sent to help him. So he should trust the Valar.
Right.
He should be.
He's
All
still
the more reason for him not to.
But he's an exiled Noldo. He might, like, there's trust, but again, how far does that trust go?
And also, as someone who received, I mean, the very simplicity and overtness of the answer to his prayer, right? He could be forgiven for saying something like, dude, take it from me, right? When the Valar want to send help, they send an enormous bloody eagle in, right? It was not... When Manwë assisted me in finding Maedhros, there were no two ways about this, right? There was no room for interpretation here, right? He sent a ginormous talking eagle to help, right? So for him to be like, but, like, I had a dream and I think that, so he could be forgiven for saying, I have experience. This is not how the Valar interact with us. It's true they do it rarely, but when they do, you don't miss it, right? So I could see his own experience leading, and I'm not saying that would necessarily be the argument that he would make, but he could be forgiven for thinking that.
He could express doubts.
Yeah.
Not doubts in Turgon, but doubts in Ulmo, doubts in how
what
this
I was
will
thinking. The one
help the Noldor in general. Why is this a good plan?
Personally.
Yeah. And also hey, what do you mean my brother's leaving? Like, he's allowed to personally not like this idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially given that, with Fingon and Fingolfin still living so close together, right? Fingon's world now for the last century or so has been like, he's part of the team. Like, that's who he is, right? He's part of the team. It's him and Fingon. And so Turgon already living off down in Nevrast, way out by the coast, so far away he didn't even make it to the Dagor Aglareb in time. I know he had other issues, but still, it comes up, I think, appropriately. So even as it is, living way out by the coast in Nevrast, is Turgon's not being the same kind of member of the team that Fingon is, right? And for Turgon now to make the next step forward, as you say, Marie, that can be an issue itself. Like, I'm going to miss my brother, and I'm a little, this makes me feel a little grumpy about the fact that my younger brother's not pulling his weight, and is fixing to pull a heck of a lot less of his weight, in this whole, defense of Beleriand thing. Again, now, Fingon's objections would be overcome because he does know Turgon. And so at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, he's going to trust him, right? He can be talked around to belief in Turgon, or to being willing to trust Turgon. But I do agree, Nick, it might raise fewer flags if those doubts had to be overcome in him. Here's another question. And I know we talked about Aravel being the one in whom we were going to kind of distill her choice was going to be kind of, synecdoche for the choice of all of the people of Nevrast to an extent. But might we want to have any of his other counselors voicing uncertainty? They don't have to be anti, right? They don't have to be laboriously talked around, but somebody close to Turgon raising a red flag, I mean, maybe that might help too.
Turgon's the kind of guy that people follow.
Right.
Right. The Gondolindrum are signing up for, hey, let's go to the secret place that you can never leave. Okay, Turgon, if you say so, let's all go.
Right.
So there's that element of he's not surrounded by a lot of naysayers.
Right. Turgon voted most likely to become a cult leader in his graduating high school class. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. There's that element to Turgon's character.
And
more
we don't want to have
what is it about the
everyone else in the
Sindar that they're
episode-
constantly getting pulled in by people like this? Like,
Because
Thingol did the same.
Thingol has the same trait.
Yeah. Thingol has the same trait. Yeah. Sorry, Rhiannon, you were wanting to say something?
Well, I was going to say we don't want to have too many people voicing negative opinions about Gondolin because we don't want to make it seem that despite all these concerns that people have, Turgon is still going to go through with Gondolin. We want to show that Gondolin is the correct decision for Turgon to be making, and the couple people who do have doubts are quickly overcome, and there just aren't that many doubts to begin with because they have such faith in their leader and such faith in the Valar.
Yeah, the solution to that is not to not bring up objections. The solution to that is for those objections to be overcome.
Satisfactorily overcome.
Right, like having people bring up their concerns doesn't damage Turgon's case,
right? If
we appropriately answer those concerns, and that I think is the struggle, because there's a lot of ways in which the move to Gondolin seems to a lot of people
absolutely
to be a little weird,
and that's exactly. Just as I was saying in my opening, yes, like it's weird when you have to integrate it into the story. It's a strange countercultural move on Turgon's part. And here's the other thing, Rhiannon, here's the other defense I would make about raising and answering objections. It'll be particularly powerful for Arthel, I think, because Arthel is uncertain. But to have her, because she's the voice, right? She's the one who's answering all the objections, right? Right. And so in responding to the objections of Fingolfin and Fingin, in responding to the objections of Celegorm and Curufin, she's also talking herself into it, right? She's also talking, because their objections, she resonates with many of their objections. Right. They are speaking for a big part of her, and she is, in responding to them, is bringing herself to the point where she can accept it.
And of course, the objections that she has the most trouble overcoming actually come from Curufin, which makes perfect sense, because like obviously he's going to figure out like all the chinks in her like rhetorical armor. And of course, the answers to that don't come from her; they come from Amras,
right?
Who, of course, plays a very critical role in in this episode.
And I did not see that coming. That was really interesting.
I thought you might like that little bit.
I did.
Amras in his yurt.
Yeah, Amras in his yurt was really fascinating. The totally countercultural Feanorian. I really liked that. And the effect on Arthel. I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I do think we can give voice to some more of these objections, because we need to make sure not only do we need to convince our viewers that Turgon is not crazy, but we also need to convince our viewers that Arthel is really convinced. But at the same time, we need to lay the foundations for the doubts that Arthel is going to have later on, right? When Arthel decides to leave, when she rethinks things after a while and begins to question the path that Turgon is on.
Yeah, it's not just boredom.
It's not just boredom. She is going to be having second thoughts about the entire project, and most importantly, she's not going to be totally wrong about that. And so making sure that we raise all of the issues now, not undermining Turgon at all, right? He is right to do this thing, but he is not always going to remain 100% right. His path is going to diverge from the almost road, right? And Arthel is going to be the crucial character who is going to first draw our attention to the fact that Turgon isn't always right in how he decides to do things and what he decides to do. And that's going to be so much fun. I can't wait for that. It's one of my favorite parts of season 5 that I'm most looking forward to, is the Arthel story. That is going to be so cool.
Me too.
That's right. I know. Trish has been waiting.
I'm a huge fan of Arathel.
Yes, we tease Trish about Gorfindel a lot, but I know that Arathel, Trish, is really like, even in a way, even more than Gorfindel. Really, one of your very favorite characters.
I'd say so. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But one of the things I really liked about this episode was that Arthel in some of the previous episodes has kind of been the comic relief. We've had this running joke about every time she goes out, she gets lost. But in this episode, we really delve into her character, and she doesn't get lost. She has people with her guiding her, so she doesn't get lost in the woods or anything. And you really get to see who she is as a character, and she's not just a funny comic relief character who always gets lost.
Yeah, I like that.
Yes, and I liked her relationship with the Feanorians. You know, again, there felt like real substance there. Like you could really see she has a lot in common with them. It's not just, again, the one sentence we get about that in the text. You could take that. I'm not saying it is the only way to interpret that sentence in the published Silmarillion, but one is free to interpret it as a mere act of whim. She's bored, and she has this whim to go and see, like, I once hung out with the Sons of Feanor. I'd like to go see them again, right? But having established her relationship with them, her friendship with them is much deeper and more substantive. When she wants to go to the Sons of Feanor, like, we've already made that. Like, even just what we've already done in season 4 means like it's going to be harder to read that sentence in the text in the same way again, right? It already feels more significant, and that's awesome. Okay, cool.
So, yeah.
Cool. And I loved Bilbo giving Dees a copy of his book. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Yeah. I was interested in the way that the frame is kind of tailing off, right? We're not building up to a climax. Right. We're not building up to an exciting ending there in the frame, but that was good. I thought that actually worked really, really well. And I liked the direction.
Foreshadowing a lot of things.
Yes, exactly. Foreshadowing many things. Yeah. Oh, one last question. I was surprised that you had. I really kind of loved the at length quoting of the Lay of Lathian description of Menegroth, right? You know, a king he was on carven throne in many pillared halls of stone. Where you began that, I thought you were going to stop short of the lines which Gimli reappropriates for the Song of Durin in the.
No, I did that intentionally.
Yeah, I thought you were going to stop short of that. So my question is: are we setting up a future like copyright suit between the dwarves of Khazad-dûm and
we can be.
I was just like, oh, okay, that's really good, because of course you had Balin singing the same song about Moria,
and Gimli asking to learn it from him.
Yes, exactly. No, I liked it. I thought that was fun. But yeah, I wasn't quite sure exactly long term where we were headed with that. We don't have to talk about that long. We're running out of time, so let's get to episode 13.
Yes. This one, we're gonna have a dragon, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna have a dragon on the screen. It's gonna be awesome.
Yes.
And I really struggled with this one. You know well that I struggled with this one, because the idea of bringing in the antagonist of the finale in the finale, just like it really messed with my brain a little bit.
Right. I hear that.
But that's okay. We soldier on, and we worked on it. And
because you see, it's not about Glaurung, right? The antagonist in the final episode of the season is Morgoth. Right?
Well, I mean, is not in any way connected to this, and
it hasn't been explicitly
find out that Glaurung left without permission. So, I mean, I
no. The point is the whole justification of having the Glaurung incident be in episode 13 is the fact. Not because the event is significant in itself, not because the fight with Glaurung is the fitting culmination of everything that has happened in the season, because in that way it's not, as you say. Mm-hmm. But the reason that it is the reason that it does fit, the reason that it does work is that, again, it's not about Glaurung, it's about Morgoth, right? It's about the siege. It's about, as we're all at the end, as all of the elves are anticipating and looking forward, and either preening themselves for how well the siege is going, or expressing their concerns that it's not, that it, might be challenged later on, or expressing Amros's confident despair that it certainly will
Nihilism,
not work, and that they're going to be crushed. Those are like the final episode. It's not an answer to that question, but it is a foreshadowing of the answer to that question, right? It is telling us what is coming. It is, Glaurung is not his own character yet, right? What he represents in this final episode is the promise that Morgoth is not going to be defeated. Morgoth is not going to be able to be held in check. Yes, the orcs were defeated, but that just means he is making other plans, and the elves are not going to be able to stop his other plans. And so the fact that so that is the sense in which it is not a sudden conflict with a new character out of the blue. I mean, it is that, but larger, like, that's not the role that it plays in the structure. Like, we're not ending. We're not culminating the campaign with a random encounter. That's not what's happening here. Right?
I mean, so yeah. I mean, I remember that was essentially your response to this concern back when we were kind of mapping out this season. What we kind of did, because, like I was saying, Morgoth doesn't appear in this episode. He's actually not driving the conflict of this episode, but the real antagonist of this episode is actually the Doom of Mandos, in a way.
Okay. Right.
All right. So the way that we address this, to connect it with the rest of the episode, and to connect it to the wedding that also takes place in this episode, which was another difficult thing to like, juxtaposing a wedding and a dragon attack, not the easiest thing in the world. But the reality is,
my idea to connect them by having Galadriel marry a dragon was quickly shot down.
That would have been exactly.
So much so that I don't even remember it coming up. The conflict in this episode is centered all around the treacheries that have been built up between the different groups of people that are involved. The betrayal that Thingol feels on the part of the Noldor, the betrayal that Fingolfin and Finarfin's people feel, in response to the Feanorians, the betrayal that the Feanorians kind of feel, because they kind of feel like they're the only ones doing their jobs.
They're the ones left holding the bag. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so that's really what we tied together in this episode, because that's really what this whole season is about, really, is dealing with the tensions that have resulted from the treachery that's been committed.
Yes.
On a lot of sides, know. Also, when we were trying to figure out how to bring the dragon in, of course, what came to mind was the Best of Both Worlds from Star Trek, where you have this implacable foe that shows up, and at first you're not sure that that's what it is, right? And so the ship comes upon this destroyed colony, and they spend the first half of the episode trying to track the Borg ship down. They eventually find it, and it's too much for them, and so on and so forth. And the episode pans out. It's one of the best episodes of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
The two of them together, I hardly recommend going and watching it on Netflix right now. Anyway, or when we're done. After you're finished listening to this, go watch it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So
you're talking about the very first Borg episodes?
No. This is the one where Picard gets assimilated.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Right. It's the best. It's the two-parter.
Yeah. Okay.
And so using that kind of like hunting for the beast motif is really kind of the direction that we went with on this one. And we used Celegorm specifically because you'd originally talked about having the dragon going towards the lands of the Feanorians so that Fingon saves the Feanorians from the dragon. But it was so it just felt kind of impersonal to do that, because obviously if he's going to do that, we're not going to see the Feanorians unless they show up at the end, but that doesn't really deal with the tension. And so,
and you don't want Fingon going around, oh my gosh, we have to save the Feanorians' land, guys! We have to save the land!
Right. And so having Celegorm be present there gave us the ability to kind of feel out that tension a little bit and kind of bring it to the front, so that we could deal with it in the course of the episode.
Right. Plus, it was extra fun to have one subplot be all about Celeborn and the other one be all about Celegorm.
Yeah.
So that
didn't make our script discussion difficult at all.
Yeah, that was also good.
And Celebrimbor showed up too, which made it even worse.
Yes. Yeah, no, that was great. I really liked the Orodreth and Celebrimbor reunion. That was fun. Okay, so I do like the way I was surprised by the whole Celebrimbor Fingon tension. I wasn't expecting that to be
Celegorm.
Darn it! See, I've already done it. Okay, immediately made the mistake as soon as I brought it up. Celegorm and Fingon tension. I hadn't been expecting that. I had been expecting a more straightforward dragon battle. Like when Fingon was showing up and found the place burned out, I was like, okay, that's great. I was seeing, but yeah, I did not expect when Celegorm showed up and then was having all these problems, and there was all this. I was surprised, but I liked it. I really liked that concept a lot. Because, Nick, exactly as you said, it kept the focus on reconciliation, right? And that was excellent. And it gave that, because that was missing. The wedding of Celeborn and Galadriel is an almost perfect, sort of not symbol, representative of sort of distillation of the whole reconciliation and harmony theme, forgiveness and reconciliation. But one dynamic that is absent from that wedding is the dynamic between the Sons of Feanor and the other Noldor, right? So that one got fair play between Fingon and Celeborn. Celegorm, darn it. That one got fair play there. So we had that, we had the reconciliation, Thingol showing up was like a nice little reconciliation eucatastrophe at the end. That was excellent. So we've kind of, we kind of healed those things. Anyway, I really liked how all that worked together. My criticisms are fairly small. One thing, let me ask a question. How are you guys picturing Glaurung? I don't mean physically. I mean mentally. Are we supposed to imagine that this is like infantile Glaurung? I'm asking because the one thing that I found myself kind of twitching at while I was reading it was Glaurung acts like an animal a lot.
Mm.
Like, he stops to eat a horse while the battle is going. Well, there are still other unfought opponents right there. Glaurung is not only intelligent, Glaurung's a genius, right? So if we're going to argue, and we could do this later on, like, it's okay. Like, we'll not get in trouble with anything right now because nobody knows who Glaurung is yet, right? So the idea that our first impression of him is that he's just a ginormous and scary beast, and then later on when we see that he's much more, and like we get that second reveal that we've saved for season 5 potentially, right, which can work, and that can be really cool. I just want to make sure that we're being consistent with that, and we need to make sure that that works. But in order for Glaurung, the Glaurung that we all know and fear, in order for him to act like he was acting in those places, he'd have to be like the mental equivalent of a toddler, basically.
Yeah. I think that...
He hasn't fought elves before. He really has no experience outside of Angband, where, as Morgoth's favorite project, he was probably pampered a little bit. He probably didn't have to do a lot of fighting with everyone else. Like, he didn't want to build him up as a ferocious animal, but he hasn't encountered the Noldor before. This is his first experience with them, and he is absolutely learning about them. And we even have this sort of trap that he sets for them in the end that is demonstrating his intelligence. The way he sort of like jumps off his trail and backtracks so that the trail ends and they don't know where he's gone, because he's gone back and hidden himself in order to surprise and ambush them.
Yeah, and that's fine. I have no objection to him acting like that. It just, that seems inconsistent with some of the other ways in which he's acting. And howsoever sheltered and ignorant he might be, which, again, he certainly is both, that can be why he is able to be chased off by Fingon and his archers in the end, right? But he's not going to, like, to be like, I'm just going to enjoy a leisurely meal while unfought opponents are circling around on my flank. That's just not consistent with the intelligence that he's showing in other places.
As a question, were you wanting the dragon to speak?
See, I was waiting for him to speak, and he didn't speak, and I was
I was wondering if that was the real issue here.
To do that, by the way.
It's like, is the issue that he stopped and ate a horse, or is the issue that he never spoke? Because they're two separate issues.
They are. The stopping and eating a horse was my primary issue.
Right, we can change that.
Yeah. And by the way, again, there was nothing that he did that I felt couldn't be explained. I just want to make sure that we could explain it, right?
So, So I would argue that the reason he falls for the trap that they set for them is probably an inexperience issue. Yeah. That's a well thought out plan on their part. They know the terrain, he doesn't, and so he falls for that. There's a couple things that he's
overconfident. You know, he believes he believes that he's the biggest, baddest monster, and they're all going to run from him. And he has reason to be confident. He's built some plausible confidence based on his success earlier on there. So yeah.
So there are two ways that we could perhaps build up his intelligence a little bit. I do agree that the eating, like, I felt a little uncomfortable with the eating myself.
All he has to do is just not eat the horse and slink off into the bushes again. You know?
Yeah.
So that they at least fear that he's doing something devious instead of just grazing.
Yeah. Another thing is when he's approaching Celegorm, I almost did it. Mm-hmm. When he's approaching Celegorm, to kind of slow that down a little bit, at least at first, and have just in the description, because obviously the audience is watching him do this, right? We're not just focused on the elves in the valley, but having us kind of see him kind of weighing the situation with, like, we can, animators can depict that,
right?
And we can describe that happening in a way that shows that he's not just an animal. The nail in the coffin, right? The nail in the coffin, obviously, is when at the very end, he turns around and he smiles back at Fingon. Like, that's when we know like, okay, that's it. There's a guy in there,
Yes,
right?
yes.
There's somebody there.
Yes.
It's okay if the audience kind of isn't sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
but I agree that they.
I agree.
I agree that they shouldn't be confused. Like, uncertainty and confusion are two different things.
And we don't want how he is acting now to be flatly inconsistent with how he's going to be later on. We can show differences and change, but it shouldn't be inconsistent.
I agree.
Yeah. But no, I agree. So I like that. And yes, for the viewers to be in doubt, I'm okay, Marie, with him not talking. I was okay with that. I was wondering if he would, but I was okay with him not talking because, again, that seems to me a fun opportunity for a season 5 reveal, basically.
Mm-hmm. And you'd also asked us not to, so we didn't.
It was good. No, I thought that worked out well. Out well.
There were a couple of other things, like in the montage at the end, we have the actual forging of the dragon helm, which I know that you guys had asked to put that in season 5 instead because you didn't want us to be drawing a lot of attention to that. We felt that by kind of burying it in that montage, we kind of removed that issue.
Yes,
but
absolutely,
we also felt that there's no way Telkar's alive by the time season 5 opens. That's fine. And I thought it was it was beautiful. I thought it was a beautiful ending.
Yeah. Farewell to Telkar. The gifting of it to Fingon, in as a fitting culmination of the Glaurung incident, and of course, perfect for Fingon to have it, obviously, so that he can give it away later on. That was great. It's true. I did not want a whole big Dragon Helm subplot in this season because it's not time for the Dragon Helm yet, but we can have it exist. And tying it to this moment was great, and having a nice little farewell to Telkar. Yeah, no, I loved it. I thought that was a brilliant solution to that problem.
The final moments of having Finrod find the camp of men, that was something also that we kind of shifted a little bit from what you guys have been talking about maybe like showing men on the eastern slopes of the mountains. But given how much of the story is going to be about these guys, about the Edain, this kind of gives it a more personal, like it illustrates the relationship that's going to be built between the elves and men, and it hints at that rather than just, okay, they're coming, because we already told people that last season. We're like, hey, guess what? Men are coming, and then they don't, right?
And then they don't, and then at the end of this season again, we're like,
hey, men are coming. No, right. This way we're saying, no, they're here, Yeah. So that's where we're starting off next
season 5 can begin. The first scene of episode 1 of season 5 can be Finrod sitting in the camp with the men, and we can have more interactions there. We can actually show more of Finrod singing to them and like conjuring images of Valinor and whatever he does.
Right.
Like, just because it's in that ending montage doesn't mean that's the only bit of the finding of men that will show.
That was my only concern. My only concern was that moment. I mean, Finrod coming among the men and playing the harp and everything is such an important mythic moment that I wouldn't want to lose it or spoil it too much by just including it in the montage. I do think it's going to make it a little... Yeah, sure. We can do we can start, the credits roll on episode 1 of season 5, and like, here's Finrod still playing the harp, right? Still singing with the men. But the initial moment of wonder, that initial moment of contact is already done. Like we've already played that card. I guess that the moment of actual contact between the thing that made me most uncomfortable about its inclusion I was a little uncomfortable. the moment of contact between the two of them, I think I would rather save. I totally agree with your impulse here to be more than just a little teaser, which is exactly like the teaser from last season. But I think the moment of first contact, I think we have to save them. I mean, we need to do justice to the moment of first contact, and not just be recapitulating it.
And I agree with that. I would say that
you see, what we show here is not Finrod conjuring the images of Valinor and impressing them in. We show it sort of from Finrod's perspective. It's he comes in, he sees people, and he finds a harp and he starts playing it. What we can show in season 5 is the Min's perspective, this wonderful magical figure coming in and playing these wonderful sounds that they've never ever been able to create with their harps, and seeing all these things. And from the Min's perspective, it will be much more wonderful, much more mythic than from Finrod's perspective.
Right, especially if the credits. So you're saying, like, the credits roll and there's Finrod still playing the harp. What I would suggest is that we actually take a few steps back.
Right.
And our actual introduction to this is the men coming over the mountains and setting up this camp, and we kind of meet Beor, right? Beor, or however you pronounce his name, and we meet them, and then they go to sleep, and then they wake up to this. So basically, there's gonna be a cut. Like what I would say is not I would say there shouldn't be any dialogue there in this bit here. It's just their eyes open, which we've done. Like that's been a motif that we've been doing.
Right.
For season endings is opening up the opening of eyes,
right,
and having their eyes open, and then bam, cut, and then when we come back in season 5, we follow them. We follow them over the mountains a little bit. We get some of their dialogue. We kind of get a very, very small piece of where they're coming from. They go to sleep and they wake up and Finrod's there, and then we get the actual contact.
Okay, I like it. I agree. No dialogue. Yes. Okay. Yes. That I think we can do. We show Finrod walking through the woods, right? And we see Finrod looking in and seeing somebody. And then we show him, we see the men, and he walks among the men, and he picks up a harp and he just plays it a little bit. Right, like all we show is him just sort of strumming the harp, and he sits down and he strums the harp, and when he strums the harp, they wake up and their eyes open, and we cut.
Right.
That way, the full mythic impact of First Contact is saved for the next season, and we're showing it, as you and Rhiannon are suggesting, from the human perspective, and so the same scene will look completely different from their point of view than it did from Finrod's point of view.
And they'll actually be on their way to becoming characters at that point. By the time
right now they're just sort of relatively savage looking,
as far as we know.
Right. Extras who are suddenly bolting up and opening their eyes.
Right. Extras, one of whom is probably played by a known actor.
Right. Sorry. What was that, Brianna?
The only one I actually have waking up is Beor. They don't all come awake at that moment. There's just one person.
I don't think we show all of them, right? Yeah, we show Beor primarily, because he's going to be the main character. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I can live with that. I agree. We don't want to just lamely recapitulate the teaser at the end of the last season, but I just really don't want to spoil that scene. But I like that angle. And one of the other things I like about it is it's very closely parallel. It's not exactly the same, but it's very closely parallel to what we did between season 1 and 2.
Yeah, I agree.
Where we saw like the elves in Cuiviénen, like from a distance from the Valar point of view, right, as they're fighting their battle with Morgoth, and then or Melkor rather, still at that point. And then we had from the meeting with Orome entirely from the elvish point of view.
Right.
So
right. Is there anything else about this before we start to wrap it up?
No, I'm good with the wedding. I thought the wedding was good. Again, I liked how that all worked, and I kind of did all my Celeborn and Galadriel discussion earlier on. So, Elise McKenna was asking in the questions box here, the switch in perspective, does it change as a lead in to a now human look at the events in the Silmarillion? Elise, yeah. We're going to, not entirely, it's not like we're suddenly shifting and we're never going to show the Elvish point of view again, but one of the things that we do have the freedom to do, and that I am quite looking forward to, is giving a human perspective on some of these other things that are going to be happening. And it does mean some of the events which we aren't changing necessarily from the Silmarillion are going to look very different when we narrate them from the point of view of the humans. Absolutely.
And we kind of already were hinting at the difference between the mortal and immortal perspective in episode 12, also with the dwarves, and showing the aging of the dwarves and the time passing and all that, which I really liked. So one thing before we completely wrap it up, I wanted to thank you guys for doing this. Not the script talks, but the project itself. And I'm not claiming to speak for anybody else, although I'm sure that there are a lot of people who would echo this. This has been one of the more fascinating looks at the Silmarillion that I've personally ever had.
Yes.
I've learned a ton of stuff, not only about the Silmarillion, but about Tolkien's greater works and a whole bunch of other side things that you learn when you're trying to script a television show.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I just wanted to, and this has been a tough season in a lot of ways. Last season was a tough season in a lot of ways. But I wanted you guys to know just how appreciated this all is, and having a creative outlet in some ways has been really, really great. So this season really has been a transition in that way, right? I mean, as we have this season gotten to the part of the text where there is so much less story to work with, and we have been filling in a lot of gaps in the, we've been trying to tell the story of all of those centuries that the narrative skips over in the Silmarillion. And so it has meant so much more creating on our part. We've been doing much more making and much less adapting in that way this year. And it's been more complicated. It's already longer. Murray, do you happen to remember, do either of you remember how many episodes, show sessions, the previously longest season was? Weren't we at like 20 at most? I have no idea. Probably something like that.
20 something, but definitely not up to 30. And this is 30 already for this one. So, and we're not finished yet. So this is definitely longer than any.
And it's not entirely our fault, because you guys spent a lot more time going over the preseason plan out than no.
Everything took longer than, which is fine, which is necessary, because there was so much that needed. But anyway, Nick, I bring this up just to echo what you were saying about creative outlet, right? My original goal of this in the Film project, when I started it, was what you said first, right? That I thought that this would be a really fun and a unique angle from which to look at the text, right? And it certainly has been that, and it's been delightfully fun. The thing that kind of surprised me in this season is how much I have also been enjoying it as a creative outlet as well. I have been finding my own creative impulses being satisfied by our discussions in this series more than I ever guessed they would be. And that's really excellent. One of the things that I have been feeling more and more, and certainly our discussions of the scripts at the end of this season has really kind of crystallized that for me in a lot of ways. I would love to be thinking as we move forward, I mean, it's awesome to have all of this stuff that we've done in our, archived in the podcast, in the now, what, 100-ish episodes, more than 100, 120-ish maybe episodes of the Film Project. It's one thing to have all this material out there in the discussion boards, which anyone can go and find and look through and everything. I want to be thinking more about something that we can collect. I don't want to use the word publish because I don't mean with a publisher. Something that we can kind of package to help other people who maybe don't have time to read through the thousands of posts on the discussion board or time to listen to the hundreds of hours of back podcast episode in this, something to help other people to get some of the benefit of that we're talking about from this project. I think that would
be a wiki.
I don't know what form we'd want it to be in exactly, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure of the mechanism. I'm not sure of the product exactly, but I think it would be, I would really like to be able to spotlight what we've done more and enable people to kind of jump in more cleanly, right? To give people a little, not that it would be a synopsis, but it would be a kind of shortcut, right? I mean, even if we had something like, the outlines and scripts and things from the, so that people could just kind of catch up on the first 4 seasons and then join us for our ongoing discussions.
It always makes me sad.
Catching up with the podcast takes months.
Exactly, it does. And
it always makes me sad when I hear somebody say, "Oh yeah, that Film Project thing. I've heard about that, but I just haven't been able to catch up." It's like, yeah, well,
don't catch
up. That. Yeah, exactly. But I'd rather you just hopped in without any idea of what was going on previously.
Exactly.
Because we'll help catch people up. We can explain what we've done in the past.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm thinking about. And we can have more of this discussion later on. But anyway, Nick, this is just as to agree with you and say I have found it very, very rewarding in the same way, and I'm really glad that this has been happening. And I, in turn, thank you guys for helping this project to evolve in the way that it has. This is certainly no longer just only a podcast series that I'm doing, right? There's a lot more life that this project has taken on, and I think it has been tremendous fun, and it certainly has made it more fun for me than it would have been even just as a kind of cool podcast idea, which is where it started. I still think it was a kind of cool podcast idea, but it's grown into so much more than that. Okay, last announcements. So we are doing our next, we're having completed our discussion of the scripts. We're going to come back on January 2nd and have our first of the last set of post-production episodes for season 4. We're going to be talking about sets and locations. So we want people to post ideas, photos, or sketches on the message boards in the Sets and Props forum as we talk about that. And the voting for casting is in progress. We're gonna the voting is gonna end on Christmas Day, so please vote for whom we're going to cast into these roles. And again, you can find all that stuff on the discussion board, the Film discussion board. So, thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for joining us for this session, for listening asynchronously, and I look forward to closing out our final discussions, our final visions for season 4, and then getting ready for season 5. So thanks everybody for listening, and Godspeed.
Thanks so much. Good night.
Excellent. Good night, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
That was a great time.
Yeah, that was really fun. Thanks.
I'm kind of sad we didn't get to actually reading.
Yeah, I was afraid of that, Brianna. And I was prepared to do it, but I was I came into it.
I had several open. I was like, I'm so ready to do this. I've been practicing my character voices and things.
It's going to be good. I think we still might have a chance to do it before the end, and we'll kind of talk about that. I was guessing that our discussions of 12 and 13 was going to take our whole time, and I didn't want to shortchange that.
Yeah, when midnight came along, we were still talking episode 12. I was like, yep, that's
exactly.
That's
what I was suspecting all along, which is fine.
Yep.
Again, the last thing I wanted to do was give short shrift to that. But yeah, there's always Mythmoot, and as I say, we might even have an opportunity to work it in one of the other sessions as we move forward. So,
all right,
cool.
Well, it's been a great year. So
yeah, sure has.
Yeah, and Nick, when you were saying all your things and stuff, you're absolutely speaking for me too.
Awesome.
And I really, really appreciate this so much. Like you were talking about a creative outlet. I have never really been a writer before this. Mm-hmm. I've never thought of myself as a writer. I've never written screenplays like this before. So like I've been learning so much, not just about the Silmarillion, but just about screenwriting in general.
Yeah, excellent. Awesome.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, good night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
And one more thanks. Thank you for sparing Angrod's life.
That was a gift to you, Rhiannon. That was Angrod's life is a gift to you to thank you for all the work that you did on the script.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Although the theoretical budget of our hypothetical blockbuster may be unlimited, the production budgets of this and the rest of our fun alternative educational projects are unfortunately not. If you have enjoyed joining our production team, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.